Good evening. I'm Alex Truth.
And I'm Maya Clarity. Welcome to Truth Report.
Tonight, we're diving deep into a tragedy that's raising serious questions about infrastructure safety and corporate accountability. A high-speed train crash in southern Spain has claimed 40 lives, and what investigators found at the scene should alarm every single person who uses public transportation.
We're going to walk through the facts, examine what the evidence is telling us, and ask the questions that need to be asked about who's responsible when profit-driven rail operators cut corners on maintenance.
This is investigative journalism. This is Truth Report. Let's begin.
Sunday evening, near the town of Adamas in Andalusia, Spain. A high-speed Ireo train traveling from Malaga to Madrid derails. The eighth carriage leaves the tracks and strikes an oncoming train. By Monday, the death toll stands at 40, with more than 120 injured and 41 still hospitalized in Córdoba.
Now here's where this gets critical, Maya. Investigators arrive at the scene and they find something that should never, ever exist on a functioning high-speed rail line, a broken rail joint. And not just broken, technicians discover wear on the fishplate, that's the metal joint connecting rail sections, and they conclude, quote, the fault had been there for some time.
Let me make sure our audience understands what that means. This wasn't a sudden failure. This wasn't an unforeseeable accident. This was a deteriorating piece of infrastructure that showed visible wear, creating a gap that widened every single time a train passed over it, until finally, catastrophically, it caused a derailage that killed 40 people.
The train was operated by Ireo, a private rail company that's majority owned by Italian state-controlled railway group Ferrovie dello Stato. The train itself was brand new, built in 2022, a Frecciarossa 1000 model. So we're not talking about aging rolling stock here. We're talking about new trains running on infrastructure that was literally falling apart.
And that's the question that needs to be front and center: who is responsible for inspecting and maintaining that track? Because someone knew, or should have known, that this rail joint was failing. Maintenance crews should have identified this during routine inspections. Safety protocols exist precisely to catch these kinds of deteriorating conditions before they become deadly.
Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has declared 3 days of mourning and promised, quote, absolute transparency, in determining the cause. Juan Manuel Moreno, head of Andalusia's regional government, said it would take 24 to 48 hours to confirm the final death toll. But here's what we need to understand: the cause has already been identified. It's that broken rail joint that showed wear over time.
The real question isn't what caused the crash, it's why that defect was allowed to persist. And that's where the investigation needs to focus. We need to know, when was the last inspection of that section of track? What did inspectors find? If they identified wear, what was the maintenance schedule? If they didn't identify it, why not? What are the inspection protocols for private operators like Ireo versus state-run rail systems?
Because here's the uncomfortable truth about rail privatization across Europe: when you introduce private operators competing for market share, there's enormous pressure to minimize costs. Infrastructure maintenance is expensive. Thorough inspections are expensive. And when you're answering to shareholders instead of the public interest, there's a financial incentive to defer maintenance, to stretch inspection intervals, to operate infrastructure right up to the edge of failure.
We've seen this pattern before. Spain's deadliest train accident was in 2013 near Santiago de Compostela. 80 people died when a train took a curve at twice the speed limit. But that was driver error. This crash is fundamentally different. This is about the physical infrastructure failing, about a broken component that deteriorated over time while trains kept running over it at high speed.
And we need to talk about accountability. If investigators determined that maintenance schedules were inadequate, if inspections were skipped or rushed, if warning signs were ignored because stopping service would cost money, then this isn't an accident. This is negligence. This is corporate manslaughter.
40 people are dead. 40 families have lost loved ones because somewhere in the chain of responsibility, whether it's Ireo, the infrastructure management company, the regulators, or the government oversight bodies, someone failed to prioritize safety over profit. Someone looked at a maintenance budget and decided that running trains over deteriorating track was an acceptable risk.
The Spanish government is promising a full investigation. We'll be watching closely. But here's what we already know: modern high-speed rail systems have the technology, the protocols, and the expertise to prevent exactly this kind of failure. Ultrasonic testing can detect internal rail defects. Visual inspections can identify worn fish plates. Maintenance schedules can replace components before they reach failure point.
So when 40 people die because a rail joint was visibly worn and allowed to deteriorate until it caused a catastrophic crash, that's not a technology failure. That's a systems failure. That's a failure of the people and institutions responsible for keeping passengers safe.
We need to know who inspected that track, when they inspected it, what they found, and what decisions were made based on those findings. We need to know whether Ireo or the infrastructure operator had any prior indication of problems in that section. We need to know whether cost-cutting or deferred maintenance played any role.
Because if we don't get those answers, if this investigation becomes another exercise in bureaucratic cover-up, then we've learned nothing. And more people will die in preventable crashes because the people running these systems value efficiency and profit more than human life.
40 people got on a train Sunday evening expecting to travel safely from Malaga to Madrid. They trusted that the infrastructure was sound, that the safety systems worked, that someone was doing their job. That trust was betrayed. And someone needs to be held accountable.
This is the core issue in infrastructure privatization across Europe and around the world. When essential public services, transportation, water, energy, are handed over to private operators, the profit motive enters the equation. And unless regulation and oversight are absolutely rigorous, safety becomes negotiable.
We see it in the UK rail system, we see it in France, we see it across privatized infrastructure everywhere, deferred maintenance, aging systems, and a constant pressure to do more with less. Until something breaks. Until people die.
The families of those 40 victims deserve more than condolences and 3 days of mourning. They deserve answers. They deserve accountability. And they deserve systemic change that ensures this never happens again.
Spain has 3 days of national mourning. That gives officials 72 hours to demonstrate whether they're serious about transparency and accountability, or whether this will become another tragedy where the investigation quietly concludes, findings get buried in technical reports, and nothing fundamentally changes.
We'll be following this investigation closely. We'll be asking the hard questions. And we'll be demanding that the people responsible for maintaining safe rail infrastructure, whether they are corporate executives, government regulators, or political officials, are held accountable for this preventable disaster.
Because the evidence is already clear, this crash was caused by infrastructure failure that developed over time. That means it was preventable. That means people are responsible. And that means justice demands consequences.
40 lives lost. 120 injured. And a broken rail joint that investigators say had been there for some time. That's not just a tragedy. That's a scandal.
Here's what connects this story to broader patterns we're seeing globally: the systematic undermining of public infrastructure through privatization, deregulation, and austerity. Over the past 3 decades, European governments have increasingly turned essential public services over to private operators, promising efficiency and competition.
But what we're actually seeing is a race to the bottom on maintenance and safety. Private operators maximize profit by minimizing costs. Infrastructure maintenance doesn't generate revenue, it's pure cost. So there's constant pressure to defer, to delay, to stretch replacement schedules just a little longer.
And regulatory capture means the agencies supposed to oversee these private operators are often underfunded, understaffed, and politically pressured not to be too aggressive. Because if you fine operators too heavily, if you shut down service for safety violations, you're accused of harming economic competitiveness.
So we get exactly what happened in Spain: infrastructure that deteriorates while trains keep running, until catastrophic failure kills dozens of people. And then we get investigations, promises of transparency, and very rarely any fundamental change in the system that allowed it to happen.
This is the conversation we need to be having. Not just about this one crash, but about the entire model of infrastructure privatization that prioritizes profit over safety. Because if we don't change the incentive structures, if we don't rebuild robust public oversight, this will happen again.
The pattern is clear. The evidence is mounting. And the question for viewers is, how many more preventable disasters do we accept before we demand that essential public infrastructure serves the public interest, not shareholder returns?
That's the real investigation. That's the story behind the story. And that's why we're here, to connect the dots, to expose the systems that allow these tragedies, and to demand accountability.
40 people dead in Spain because a rail joint was allowed to deteriorate. That's not just a local tragedy. That's a warning about what happens when profit replaces safety as the organizing principle of essential public services.
We'll continue following this story. We'll report on the investigation's findings. And we'll keep asking who benefits when maintenance is deferred, inspections are inadequate, and infrastructure fails catastrophically.
Because someone always benefits. Someone made money by cutting corners. Someone avoided costs by stretching maintenance intervals. Someone prioritized efficiency over safety. And those are the people who need to be identified and held accountable.
Thank you for watching Truth Report. We're here because the mainstream media often fails to ask these deeper questions, to connect these systemic patterns, to hold power accountable.
This is investigative journalism. This is the work of exposing how systems fail, who's responsible, and what needs to change. If this reporting matters to you, share it. Discuss it. Demand better from the institutions that are supposed to keep us safe.
I'm Alex Truth.
And I'm Maya Clarity.
Stay informed. Stay critical. And demand accountability.
Until next time, this is Truth Report.